Hello again, welcome back to part 2 of the Enlarger series. Didn't realise there was so much interest in Enlargers. Don't start collecting them. I've got a whole place full of cameras that I've collected and lenses that I've collected, and so far I've got 5 Enlargers, but it's quite easy to become a hoarder and a collector of them as well, and they take up a lot more space than cameras and lenses. I've still got the same 2 Enlargers that I had in the first episode, if you like. So today I'm just going to give you some more hints and tips and show you some more Enlargers. A spirit level or a bubble level is really useful. When you're designing your darkroom, I said in the first part, ideally you want a solid floor, a concrete floor or a solid floor. You don't want a floor that's creaky and that's going to cause any sort of vibration. Most Enlargers have a really solid baseboard, if you can see that. They're either metal or wood. I quite like the wood ones. This is my my crocus I showed you in the first one. And you want really a spirit level or a bubble level. This is one I stick on the hot shoe of a camera, making sure everything's level. And the main thing you want to check is that everything is indeed level, so the bubbles are all in the centre. It also applies to the part where the lens goes. You want to make sure that that actually sits level. Again, these little ones are quite useful for that. You've got to make sure that it is all level, because what you'll find if they're not is that one side of your print will be sharp and the other side will be slightly softer, etc. So it's important to check all over your Enlarger on the level surfaces to make sure it is level. This plane here must be parallel to this plane at the bottom in normal printing. Now this particular Enlarger has movements on it, so what you can do by turning this knob here is that you can tilt, very much like the movements on a large format camera. So you can see there that I've tilted the lens. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of this is advanced printing, but you can use certain techniques to overcome, for example, converging verticals. If you don't have a shift or a swing lens, and to be honest, most architectural photography should be done on a view camera. Put a digital back on it, that's fine, but you need movements to get rid of things like converging verticals. It's always better to get your image as near as perfect in camera, rather than taking or settling for an inferior image that when you take it and then trying to compensate for it in the darkroom, you could be there for hours, waste an awful lot of paper and chemicals and still not be happy with results. So my golden rule with all kinds of photography is get it right in camera, whether that's digital or whether it's analog using film, wet plates, collodions, whatever. Always try and get the image right in the camera. But it is possible with these Enlargers that have tilt that you can overcome this. This Enlarger, you can also tilt the head as well. So that's quite an extreme. I don't quite know what the results of that would be, but as you can see, you have a tilt available in the 2 planes, so that should help you. The other side of the argument, of course, is masking frame. You can also, of course, tilt your easel that way, all sorts of weird angles. But again, this is very advanced printing techniques, and you can waste an awful lot of time and energy and paper trying to get the results that you want. But there are some Enlargers. The Fujimoto doesn't have movements at all, but the crocus does. Right, they can go away. So as you can see, there are certain advantages in having an Enlarger that moves, but obviously you've got to use your spirit level to make sure that it goes back to being level. This one actually has a lock on it, but the lock is adjustable. There's a little screw down here so you can adjust this so that you don't really need the level then once it's been adjusted once. you know where the level plane is, because you want this to all be in a straight line and to be straight and level. So I highly recommend one of these. You can use it on the hot shoe of a camera, and you can use it for setting up your enlargers and for messing about with them. Now the other thing that caught people's interest was this timer. And the problem with all of these darkroom toys, whether it's a timer or a colour analyzer, is that you need to make the perfect print first. They don't work straight out of the box, a bit like a camera metering does. That's pretty accurate. These things tend not to be. You have to calibrate them. So for that, you'd make a normal print, doing your 3 or your 5 second exposures to build up a strip, so that you can choose the best one. Another device that I will dig out further on in this video is called a ring around, and a ring around is normally used for colour printing, but I found a ring around to be really useful for exposure and also for contrast. It enables you to print different contrasts on the same piece of paper. But with this device, for example, once you've made your good print that you're happy with, you can then input the time that it's come up to. So in this case, this is for I think it's photo speed paper that I've got this set up for at the moment, from HP5 negatives. So this was 20 seconds, so I set it on the 20 seconds. So this is the time. This other button is the paper sensitivity. So what you do is you put that on there and you adjust the sensitivity until the light goes out, or until both lights come on. I think on this one both lights come on. One's like under, one's over. And for this photo speed paper that I'm using, it has a sensitivity of 2.5. So I leave that set on 2.5, and you set that in the balance mode on this one. There's also an off mode as well, and you've got a time mode also. This one's unusual in that it plugs in the safe light as well as the enlarger. This came with the enlarger. I had to look up on the internet how to use it. So obviously there's an expose button down at the bottom here, which is when you want to do your time. But you have to set your sensitivity for your paper, and that's what this does. And then you have a probe. Now you can put a diffuser over the lens, which will give you like an average reading of the whole print. But what I like to do is I like to use this sensor either in the shadows or in the highlights, a bit like a spot meter in a camera, so that you can determine the exposure in certain areas. And what you do then is you put this into those areas, you adjust this again because it knows the sensitivity of the paper, and you adjust this until it comes with a green light, and then that's going to be your exposure for that particular area of the print. I don't use the diffuser method, I use like a spot method of printing, either for the shadows or for the highlights, or an area in between. Again, there's a lot of choice in this of how you use it. But that's really the basics of an exposure meter cum timer. These are quite popular. They don't really save you an awful lot of paper, but it does make it a lot faster once you've got it set up to go through a roll. My recommendation would be to use a camera like, one of my favourites would be the OM2, which has a stepless shutter. So your negatives tend to be very consistent with a stepless shutter, because it isn't restricted to just say 125th or a 250th or a 500th. If it needs 497th or 123rd, that's what shutter speed it will use, and it will give you a very consistent row of negatives that will be very similar in their required exposure to print. So if you're somebody who prints a whole 36 exposure film, then that would be the way to go. Obviously contact sheet is one thing, but some people do like to print a whole row of 36 at say 5x7, for example. It makes it a lot easier if you're using a camera with a stepless shutter. And a lot of the program cameras have stepless apertures as well, so you're not stuck with just a full stop or a half stop or a third stop. It can set any sort of f number that it thinks is suitable. Gives you consistent negatives, and it's important that your processing is consistent. So I recommend sticking with one film stock, one developer, one fixer, one stop if you want to use one. I don't use a stop, I just use water. That was the way I was taught, always have done. Same when I'm printing, I don't use a stop, I only use water for the stop stage. But you need to get your process consistent and get your negatives consistent. Consistency is very, very important. If you keep chopping and changing your films, your developers, fixers not so much, because fixers, you either like the smell of fixer in the morning or you don't. I don't mind fixer smell, I quite like it, but a lot of people find the smell a bit overpowering. But find something, especially when you're starting out, and stick with it so that you can get consistent results. Right, let me pause this bit here, and then I'm going to dig out some more enlargers and we can show you some more features and functions. Hey, welcome back. We've had a bit of a change around and got a different enlarger this time. I've got two of these actually, but I'm only going to show you one because they're both identical. And this is a Philips PCS 2000. Just make sure that's in the frame so you can see it. There you go. I can go up a little bit. As you'll notice, the head is quite a lot smaller. This is a colour enlarger, by the way. The head is quite a lot smaller than the other ones we've looked at. And this is a slightly different way of operating. To move it, you just literally grab hold of it and move it up and down, which is really nice. And you can turn it around on the baseboard and project on the floor like the other ones. Very similar. This one has a red filter that goes underneath the lens. There's no lens in this at the moment, and you've got a focusing bellows here. This one doesn't have any movements in it. It's just a pure up and down enlarger. There's no tilt or anything like that on this one. And you'll see it has a transformer and it has a separate control box. And the controls for the filters are in the box rather than in the head. Other than that, it's very similar. This is your negative holder. Again, this is glassless. I don't really use glass in my... and these are normally adjustable. This one has curtains that you can slide for cropping, etc. So that's your negative holder. Now, if you want to use glass, by all means do so. But you've got to make sure that the glass is what they call anti-Newton ring glass. Newton rings will occur if you use normal glass. This is anti-Newton glass. Try and get it with the enlarger or with the negative carrier, and this will stop you getting that sort of ring pattern when the glass is against the negative. I don't use them, I just use open carriers. But I did get the glass with it when I bought them. So here again we have anti-Newton ring glass. I don't know what they do, they must treat it or coat it or do something with it, but that will stop you getting Newton rings. Obviously it will give you a better, flatter negative if you have problems with that, but I think if you dry them correctly, I don't think you'll have too much of a problem with 35mm. And I've never really had any problems with medium format 120 film. So I take the top off. Oop. Just getting a bit of a bind to lift off. Now this is a diffuser enlarger. Let me drag you over here and show you inside of this head. Up we go. Give you a bit of a tilt down. See if I can get you any closer. Oh. Too many cameras. So as you can see, the top of it's completely different. What you have is you have 3 halogen bulbs, and obviously the far one is green, the middle one is red, and this one is blue, and that refers to the filters that are behind them. And then those 3 feed into one of these, which is like a diffuser box. You can see this diffuser, it's got 6x6 written on it. So your three sources of light shine in through this hole, and you can see inside it's really just polystyrene lined with this diffuser sheet on the bottom. So this one is for 2 1/4, so you just slot it in. If I bring you around, you might be able to see into the filters. There we have the green filter, the blue filter. If I can swivel this around without dropping something on the floor. And there's the blue, so you see these filters. So the filter value doesn't actually change. What changes is the intensity of each of the bulbs. So when you're making adjustments, you're adjusting the brightness of each of these bulbs. This is additive printing rather than subtractive. So rather than putting a filter in to remove light, you're actually increasing and reducing the colours by adjusting the brightness of the bulb. Very, very different approach taken by Philips. That just slots in there, and obviously it redirects the light down in through the negative and then down to the baseboard. So if you're changing formats, I've got the two here. This is you can see this one's slightly different inside, but it's basically the same idea. Just the box with the polystyrene lining, and that obviously gives us the coverage needed for 35mm, whereas this one is a fuller 6x6. So if you're buying one of these enlargers, the reason I had two was one was 35mm with a 35mm box, and the other one was 6x6. But I don't need the two enlargers out, so I can just change these parts and change the lens. Obviously a 50mm lens for 35mm and an 80mm lens for medium format. It also keeps the heat away from the negative. It's a big advantage of it. The heat is back here, it's not directly above, and especially if it's going through lenses, you can get quite a lot of heat down into the negative, which can give you problems. With this one, it's a lot more insulated from the heat. So this is a Philips PCS system. There's a number of different models in this system. I ended up with two of the 2000s, and I've got to say I'm fairly impressed with them. So I don't really like using them for black and white. I'd rather just use the normal black and white enlargers. But yeah, they're very very good enlargers. The only problem is you've got 3 bulbs rather than just the one to change. So here we're looking at the control panel. So you can see electronic tri-1 they called it, and it gives you different scales. So this is red, this is green, and this is the blue with the corresponding colours, the yellow, the magenta and the cyan. So as you increase one, you decrease the other. I don't have an analyzer for this. I do intend to get a Philips analyzer and try using it with that. The bottom one is just your timing, so you can set your times on here. You've got a switch for positives or negatives. This dates back to the days of Cibachrome when you used to make prints from transparencies. Obviously a master on off switch, and then you've got standby and focus, and you just push the button to make your exposure. No meter with this one at all, and you just do this by making the standard test strip of different exposure times. But yeah, nice enlargers, but they're the opposite to the other colour enlarger, the crocus that I showed you, in that these are additive and the other one is a subtractive. So it can be a bit confusing if you're using one over the other. I've only really used this one for black and white, but I much prefer using the Fujimoto. I've got the next one I'm going to show you is the press Fujimoto, the Suitcase Enlarger. But yeah, it's got illuminated controls, which is quite nice. And you can see that there's little bulbs in there. They don't fog the paper. But it's all illuminated, so it's quite easy to use in the darkroom. As I said before, get a lens that's got an illuminated aperture control, illuminated f-stops, makes life a lot easier. And yeah, that's the Philips PCS. So there is a range of enlargers in this series. They've not been made since I think about the 1990s, but they do come up for auction quite often. And Yeah, I definitely recommend them, but they do take getting your head around a little bit because the filtration is completely different and not many people cover how to use them. Right, I'm going to pause the video here and get you another enlarger. So this is the last enlarger we've got to look at. Back in the days of film, your press photographer would have been carrying one of these in his car or wherever he was going to. And this is 35mm only, this one. But as you can see, it all packs away into this case. You've got some. Well, this one's actually got a lens on it. And that part. Oh, screws. Take this bit out. This bit screws onto the top of there, like so. This has got a thread in it. This is metal, so that would screw onto there with this part going up from underneath, and it's a simple. Where are we? Can you see that? It's a simple black and white enlarger. It does have a filter drawer in it, so I suppose you could do colour at a push. But yeah, standard enlarger layout, got the little red filter, got the lens on it. Fujimoto Lucky. This is where your negative goes. There's your filter drawer. And then this is your lamp housing. I can't remember how this comes off. I think it unscrews. Ooh. Awkward things. I think this just pops off actually. Yeah, there's your bulb. And this one's a condenser as well. It has lenses in there just below the filter drawer. Could do with a good clean actually. And there's always something ends up on the floor. Yeah, it's a push in and twist. It's like the bayonet arrangement for this. So push that in and then twist it. But yeah, this is a portable enlarger. Funnily enough, my first enlarger was the infamous or famous Zenith Suitcase Enlarger. With those, all the interior foam tends to have been deteriorated by now. But yeah, that was a cheap enlarger back in the 70s, and that was my very first enlarger. It was a Zenith, what was it called, UPM, 35mm again. It was adequate, it did the job, but I much prefer things like the Crocus, or the bigger Fujimotos that have got more solid construction. But yeah, this is a portable enlarger designed for press use. So you check into your hotel or whatever, and once you've taken your pictures, you can print them off on here and send them by machine back to the editor's office. Right, thank you very much for watching. Oops, sorry, just kicked the camera. There we have enlargers. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Anything I've missed, let me know. Any questions, queries, comments, etc., drop them down below. I thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support. We're nearly at the 100 subscribers. I checked last night and it was 99, so I think we'll be doing the film giveaway next week. So keep tuned, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Hopefully we'll be back to doing cameras that are a lot smaller and lighter.